The rain had not stopped for 3 days in Suzhou. It dripped from the curved tiles of the brothel's roof, turning the narrow alleyways into small rivers that reflected the glow of red lanterns. Inside one of those dimly lit rooms sat Li Wei, a boy no older than 15, his fingers trembling around a bowl of watery rice. The scent of cheap perfume and incense clung to the air, mixing with the faint echo of laughter from behind silk curtains. He wasn't supposed to be there, not as a guest, not as a customer, not even as a servant of his own will. He had been sold by his father, a man broken by debts and drought. The brothel master, Madame Zhao, had promised to train him, her way of saying he would scrub floors, fetch tea, wash linens, and serve the women who were bought and sold nightly like fading flowers. For the first few weeks, Li Wei barely spoke. He moved like a ghost through the corridors, watching the painted faces and weary eyes of the women who called this place home. Some were kind to him, others cold, all were tired. At night, he'd curl up in the corner of the laundry room, his small body pressed against damp fabric, listening to the rain beat against the wooden shutters. One evening, as the brothel prepared for the emperor's tax collectors, men who came not just for money but for pleasure, Madame Zhao ordered everyone to make the place shine. Li Wei worked until his fingers blistered, polishing brass mirrors and sweeping floors slick with spilled wine. That night, he saw Mei Lin, the brothel's most beautiful courtesan, crying quietly by the window after the men had gone. Her makeup was smeared, her hair undone, and for the first time, she looked less like a goddess and more like a broken child. Li Wei, clutching a rag, whispered softly, "Do you want some tea, Sister Mei?" She turned, startled, then smiled faintly. "Tea won't fix what's broken, little one. But it can make you warm," he said, and hurried away to pour a small cup from the pot he had saved for himself. When he handed it to her, she held it as if it were something precious. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was not empty, it was full of shared pain neither could name. From that night onward, Mei Lin often sought his company. She would tell him stories, about her village near the mountains, about the cherry blossoms that bloomed every spring, about the younger brother she'd once had before famine took him. Li Wei would listen with wide eyes, as though every word painted a doorway out of that brothel, out of Suzhou, out of despair. In return, he told her about his dream, to be a calligrapher, to write words that lasted longer than pain. She laughed the first time he said it. "You can barely write your own name, fool." "Then teach me," he said stubbornly. Something softened in her gaze. And so, by candlelight, Mei Lin began teaching him the art of brush and ink. She stole scraps of rice paper from the accounts room and dipped the brush gently into the black pool. "The character for heart," she whispered, drawing a single stroke that curved like a sigh. "You must write it with feeling. Not from the hand, from here." She touched his chest. Over the months, Li Wei learned to write beautifully, even Madame Zhao took notice. She used his handwriting for her account books and letters, which earned him better food and less beatings. But more than that, writing gave him a soul again. It was as if every stroke of the brush rebuilt the pieces of himself that poverty had shattered. Then one winter, tragedy struck. Mei Lin fell gravely ill. The physician said it was her lungs, too many nights in cold silk, too much smoke, too much sorrow. Madame Zhao refused to pay for medicine, saying, "There's no profit in saving a flower that's already wilted." Li Wei, desperate, did the only thing he could think of, he stole from the brothel's strongbox. Late at night, he crept into Madame Zhao's quarters and took 3 silver taels, enough to buy medicine and a bit of rice porridge. But he was caught before dawn. The punishment was severe. Madame Zhao dragged him by the hair before the entire house, screaming about betrayal. "A thief! A beggar's son dares steal from me," she shouted. The guards beat him until his back bled. Mei Lin, too weak to stand, crawled to his side, crying, "He did it for me. Please, he's just a child." Madame Zhao spat. "Then let him learn what kindness brings in this world." For 3 days, Li Wei lay feverish on the cold stone floor of the storage room, his wounds untreated. He thought he would die there, and part of him wanted to. But on the 4th night, when the moon hung low like a paper lantern, Mei Lin appeared. She could barely walk, her steps trembling. In her hand was a small bundle of steamed buns. "I sold my jade hairpin," she whispered. "You need to eat." He shook his head, tears mixing with blood. "No, keep it. You need it more." She smiled faintly. "You've given me something better." She took his hand and placed a folded paper inside. "I've written you a letter. When you can walk again, run away from here. Find a monastery, or a school. Learn. Write. Live. Promise me." Li Wei clutched the paper as if it were his heartbeat. "I promise." That was the last time he saw her alive. By spring, Mei Lin was gone, her body buried in a small plot behind the brothel, marked only by a single stone with no name. Madame Zhao ordered everyone to forget her. But Li Wei couldn't. He kept her letter hidden inside the lining of his shirt and, one rainy night, when the guards were drunk, he ran. He ran until his feet bled, until the city lights vanished behind him. He crossed rivers, climbed mountains, begged for food in villages, and finally found refuge in a small Buddhist monastery near Hangzhou. There, an old monk named Master Shen took pity on him. "You've seen too much pain for one so young," the monk said gently. "But pain, too, can be a teacher." Li Wei stayed. He cleaned the temple, copied scriptures, and slowly learned the beauty of silence. The monks noticed his skill with the brush, and soon he was tasked with transcribing the sacred sutras. Years passed. His handwriting grew elegant, calm, strong, alive. People from distant towns came to see his work, to buy his scrolls, to read his words that somehow made even suffering look like art. One evening, after many years, a wealthy merchant from Suzhou came to the monastery to commission a scroll. When he mentioned Madame Zhao's brothel, Li Wei felt his chest tighten. "Is it still there?" he asked. "Gone," the merchant said. "Burned down in a fire years ago. They say the madam died in it. A pity, but such is karma." Li Wei said nothing. That night, he walked alone through the temple garden, under a sky filled with lanterns. He took out Mei Lin's letter, the same piece of paper he had carried for years. The ink had faded, but the words still glowed with the same warmth. "If this world breaks you, write it back together. If you ever find freedom, remember those still trapped. Don't curse life for being cruel, teach it to be kind." Tears blurred his vision. In that moment, he understood, the story of Mei Lin, of himself, of countless forgotten souls, could not end in silence. It had to live on. So, he began to write. Not the scriptures of the Buddha this time, but the stories of the broken, the girls who sang for coins, the boys who dreamed of freedom, the people who loved in places where love was forbidden. He wrote under the name Anonymous Monk of Suzhou, and his scrolls began to spread quietly among scholars, poets, and nobles. They called his writings, the Ink of Mercy. Years later, when Li Wei was an old man, a young scholar came to visit the monastery. The boy bowed deeply and said, "Master Li, your stories changed my life. They made me believe that compassion is stronger than fate." Li Wei smiled gently, the wrinkles around his eyes deep like rivers. "Then remember this, young one, kindness is the only rebellion that never fails." That night, before he died, Li Wei placed Mei Lin's letter on his writing table, beside a freshly written scroll. On it, in elegant strokes, he had written, "Even in the darkest house, one act of kindness can light 1,000 lamps." When the monks found him the next morning, the candle beside his bed had burned down to wax, but the flame of his story never went out.